Joining us now on the line from San Francisco, California, Tim O'Reilly. He is founder and CEO of O'Reilly Media, Inc. And Tim, I want to start by just quoting to you an excerpt from a book, or actually from an article by Nicholas Carr, who's the author of a book called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, and then get you to comment on that excerpt. Here's what Nicholas says. He says, the idea that our minds should operate as high-speed data processing machines is not only built into the workings of the Internet, it is the network's reigning business model as well. The faster we surf across the web, the more links we click and pages we view, the more opportunities Google and other companies gain to collect information about us and to feed us advertisements. Most of the proprietors of the commercial Internet have a financial stake in collecting the crumbs of data we leave behind as we flit from link to link. The more crumbs, the better. The last thing these companies want is to encourage leisurely reading or slow, concentrated thought. It's in their economic interest to drive us to distraction. Now, I can't help but notice, Tim, as you wear your Google shirt, branded very appropriately given the business you're in, the article is asking whether Google's making us stupid. What's your view on that?
Well, I think it's, quite frankly, a shallow argument. First off, to the point that Internet business models depend on advertising and sort of mindless consumption. Practically all Western business models depend on mindless consumption. The Internet at least gives us the ability to offer other users opinions, to actually choose better products. The argument that some new technology makes us stupid is always both true and false. And I think Nicholas knows that the truth is far more nuanced than he makes it. You know, it used to be that before widespread literacy, people could perform prodigious feats of memory. We became stupid by comparison. For that matter, just our more sedentary lifestyle has made us stupid. Remember that wonderful opening to Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, in which it's a preface called Yaley's Question, in which this man from New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, says to Jared Diamond, "How come you guys have all the stuff? You're so stupid. You know, if we took you into the jungle, you'd be dead within a few days." You know, yes, you know, our civilization made us stupid, but it also made us smarter. And I believe that what we're doing today is, yes, it's making us favor some parts of our consciousness over others, but far from exclusively. I think there's a great deal of deep thought expressed on the Internet. And meanwhile, we have this enormous capability where we are augmented by our digital tools. You know, when we have an event, say, like the Sendai earthquake, and within hours we have a comprehensive encyclopedia entry about it that is informative, accurate, and complete, that makes us more informed. When we have tools in which people can crowdsource you know, the names of people who are missing to see if they've been identified, if they've been found. This is, again, the Internet making us smarter and more capable, you know, in areas like disaster response, in areas like just even, you know, product selection. I'm in the process of shopping for something. The Internet makes me smarter. It doesn't make me stupider.
Okay, let me follow up with this then. Let me follow up with this, Tim, because you know, for those who don't follow this as carefully as you and I do, the term Web 2.0 is something that we've heard a lot about, but people may not know that you're actually the guy who coined that expression. It has taken on a number of different meanings over the years, but when you use it, what do you mean?
Well, there's really two levels to that term. The first was, I just need to emphasize, it was not a version number. This is the same web we've always had. But what it was a recognition after the dot-com bust in 2000, 2001, that the web was not over, that it was coming back. And in fact, that there was something that distinguished the companies that survived the dot-com bust from those that had failed. And what I believed was the core of that distinction was that all of these sites in one way or another were attempting to harness collective intelligence. You know, if you look at, say, Wikipedia, it's fairly obvious. But even Amazon, as compared to other e-commerce sites, was an early pioneer in harnessing users to comment on, to vote up the products. And they featured the products that people liked the best. They didn't, their competitors featured the ones that they wanted to sell, that they, for example, had a financial interest in. Whereas Amazon really mined the attention stream of their users and their votes, their preferences, their comments to feature those products first. Google used actual clickstream data to try to show people ads that they would find useful. They used link data to figure out what sites people thought were the most important and authoritative. They actually used incredibly intelligent predictive agents to figure out which ads would be most likely to be clicked on. And they were more successful than their competitors because they didn't sell to the highest bidder. They might sell the second lowest priced, second priced ad because they knew it would be clicked on 3 times as much. And that kind of algorithmic intelligence is at the heart of the web. And these applications, yes, they can be used for trivialities, but they do, on the whole, make us smarter. And the same capabilities that you see in these early Web 2 applications are also being used in areas, for example, take the Google self-driving car, or automated translation, or just the way that news stories propagate, or the way that social media was used to help topple regimes in the Middle East.
Well, let me pick up on that part there, because
yeah.
if we started talking basically about the private sector applications for it, but now you've taken us into an area which is more sort of citizen-driven, and that takes us to government. I want to know how we can apply the lessons of what you call Web 2.0 to government.
Well, this has been a theme that I've been focused on for the last couple of years, because it seemed to me we had a unique teachable moment, which came not really just from the web and Web 2.0, but from the iPhone. Because when you think about government programs, they look a lot like the way cell phones looked before the advent of the iPhone. That is, a few people got together in a back room, figured out what the product looked like, and then you had to take it or leave it. And Apple, by turning the phone into a platform, suddenly went from 20 or 30 applications on the phone to 300,000 or 400,000. And that seemed like a wonderful metaphor for how government ought to act. And at its best, does act. If you consider, for example, the decision to open up the GPS satellite system to civilian use. Here was an investment the government made that has enabled all kinds of private sector applications. We wouldn't have cars that were self-driving on our horizon. We wouldn't have navigation systems in our car or our phone. We wouldn't have services like Foursquare that are location-based. We wouldn't have location-based relevant shopping, without that government decision, that policy decision to build something that was hard, that was collectively useful, and then to make it available to the market. Now, I think that same kind of thinking is at work right now in many, many other areas. The people in the U.S. here at the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, are thinking, how could we make Medicare work more like Google? Where Google, for example, figures out which ads actually work.
Give us a concrete example of that, if you would. How does Medicare start to take the principles of 2.0 to its purposes?
Well, again, we're just in early stages of this, but in the Accountable Care Act, there is this idea that rather than paying for the quantity of medical care, you'll actually pay for outcomes. Now, I think that's very similar to the shift in the advertising model. Well, you'll pay for some number of impressions, to that you'll actually pay for some number of clicks. People say, no, I don't care how many people you showed it to, I care how many people took action. And in a healthcare context, you don't care how many times somebody went to the doctor or got a test. You want to know, did this test actually make them healthier? And by creating feedback loops, which you can only do with the aid of these powerful technologies, you can create electronic feedback loops where you can start to improve those outcomes. There's a lot of things that are sort of shocking when you start to dig into healthcare. For example, in the absence of electronic medical records, about a third of lab tests are never actually viewed by the physician who ordered them. Why? Well, you send in the test, it comes back, the lab result is put into a paper file. What happens if the patient doesn't return? What happens if the patient doesn't call and say, hey, what happened to my test? Often, the doctor never opens that file again. It's kind of shocking, but you start to think throughout this digital nervous system that we're building on the consumer internet, we're figuring out the principles for how you build digital nervous systems for everything from process automation in factories to the way cars work. You may have heard recently that Ford is experimenting with using Google's prediction engine to actually feed back into their algorithm for fuel efficiency. It's clearly true also in financial markets. There's a lot that the same principles are applied in network markets. And you also see there the importance of deep human reflection, that very thing that Nick Carr said is missing, to figure out how do we control these tools that we're building.
Well, that leads me nicely.
There are people who are thinking deeply about those questions.
Well, they lead nicely to a question about privacy because, of course, in the same way that private sector companies, every time you click, gain a little bit more knowledge of what kind of a person you are, one wonders about what kind of personal information, for lack of a better expression, Gov 2.0, what the government will need or require of its citizens in order to have that kind of online transformation that you're talking about. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are a lot of challenges on the privacy front. There's no question in my mind that it is going to be very, very difficult in the future to not have information known about you. Privacy researcher Jeff Jonas, he's actually a wonderful thinker on the topic, just uses the analogy of a picture puzzle. He says, when you start out, picture puzzle is really easy. You just put a piece down anywhere. In the middle, it gets hard. And at the end, it gets really easy again because there's only a few places left for the pieces to go. And because there's now so much digital information about us all, we're in the end game of a picture puzzle all the time. Only a few pieces of data will be needed to identify anyone in any context. And people are willingly making those trade-offs. So I think society hasn't caught up with the fact that the digital technologies that we use, that we like, that we love, that give us so much value, are in fact a trade-off where we are giving up information about ourselves. We give up our location. People will say, oh, I would never use Foursquare to demonstrate my location. And it's silly. Your phone knows where you are all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's discoverable by hackers, by law enforcement agencies, and now, of course, willingly by applications that people are using, for shopping and the like.
Indeed.
And so what we have to do is shift the model away from, oh my gosh, information about us is discoverable, this is bad, we need to put up some kind of fence or wall. I'm mindful of the Maginot Line, it won't keep us secure. What we have to figure out is what behaviors we consider inappropriate.
Well, let me ask you more directly about
those behaviors. But let me just finish this thought.
Okay.
It's very easy to break into most houses. We have glass windows, right? We don't all have bars and heavy shutters on our windows unless we live in a particularly high crime neighborhood, right? That's the analogy that we need to keep in mind for privacy. If people come break into our house, we go after them. If people come peeping in through our curtains, we stigmatize them. And we need to figure out what behaviors are inappropriate with private data and give up the idea that somehow we can keep that data hidden if people really want to get at it.
Let me move us in our last few minutes here then to, rather than a general conversation about how government is going to transform this, to how the Obama administration in particular has done it. Because, of course, he came into office pledging to revolutionize how transparent government is going to operate. Here's a quote from the president from 2008. He says, "We must use all available technologies and methods to open up the federal government, creating a new level of transparency to change the way business is conducted in Washington and giving Americans the chance to participate in government deliberations and decision-making in ways that were not possible only a few years ago." Okay, almost 3 years in, how's he doing?
Well, I think first off, there's been a lot of great stuff. I mentioned the work that's happening at the Department of Health and Human Services. It's happening in agencies throughout the federal government, where they are coming to grips with this new world of technology and how it can help them do their mission. That being said, I think the political process and this idea of participation, transparency meaning participation in the political process, hasn't really happened anywhere near as well as any of us would have liked, or as Obama has promised. And I think some of it is that our government is still fundamentally a command and control system, and we haven't entirely figured out what it means to be a networked society. You know, we're still, it's like, oh, we will use these tools to get input for our citizens, but then but then we'll make our decisions in the old way, as opposed to, you know, what kind of conditions can we establish that will allow people to collaborate in new ways? And that goes back to this idea that I've been pushing of government as a platform. You know, there's these wonderful, powerful platform technologies. And I'll give you an example just from the other day. Take YouTube. YouTube is this facility in which anyone can upload and share a video. And there was this funny story, it was featured in Newsweek, in which the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan was characterized as one of the top 10 dying cities in the US. And the people got together, they had 3,000 people who put together a parade with a video showing off Grand Rapids. And it's lip syncing to the tune of Bye Bye American Pie. And it is an infectious video. It's, as of last night, it was viewed about 750,000 times. That's since Thursday. So it's probably up over 1 million by now. You know, now you imagine the old days in which some chamber of commerce says, you know, works with or the local government says, oh, we're going to, you know, commission a, you know, an advertising video to, you know, encourage our town or to boost our town. Here, the people did it themselves. And that's the thing we have to remember. We've built this model in our minds of government as a kind of vending machine. You know, we put in taxes, we get out services. And when we don't like what we get, you know, our option is to shake the vending machine and see if we can get something a little bit different. And you know, we'll do that through an election or writing to our representatives. But really, government is a mechanism for collective action. And if you look back at the history of how our governments evolved, particularly democratic governments, it was bit by bit we said, oh yeah, it's easier to do this together. You know, so the early history of the US, you know, sort of like first often these things would be private, and then people would say, well, you know, yeah, let's not just have a volunteer fire department. Let's collect taxes and have a fire department that covers everybody. Let's have a police force. And yes, maybe government has gotten out of whack, but we have to remember that it's a mechanism for collective action. And what's so powerful today is that through technology, we have new mechanisms for collective intelligence, for collective decision-making, from collective action. And our opportunity is to try to apply those to the scale of problems that we have today.
Tim O'Reilly, that's our time tonight. Thanks for joining us on the line from San Francisco.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.